Northern newspapers gave Ulysses Grant that name during the bloodiest weeks of 1864, when the casualty lists from the Overland Campaign started arriving faster than the public could absorb them. Butcher. It is the word most people associate with how the other side must have seen him too, a crude general who simply threw men at entrenched positions until the entrenchments gave out. It fits the popular image of Grant so neatly that most people assume Robert E. Lee's own generals, the men who watched that campaign from the receiving end, must have felt the exact same contempt, maybe even more of it. They did not. What Lee's generals actually said about Grant behind closed doors is a far more complicated, far more human story than a single insult, and in at least one case, it involves a general defending Grant's reputation to his own commander's staff, a friendship that survived 4 years of trying to kill each other, and a private respect that some of Grant's own countrymen were never willing to extend to him at all. The general who warned his own side first. Before Grant ever commanded the Union's armies in the East, before Cold Harbor or the Wilderness or any of the campaigns that would earn him his newspaper nickname, one Confederate general had already quietly flagged him as a problem. Richard Ewell, talking with a group of fellow West Point veterans early in the war, mentioned an obscure officer stationed out west whom he genuinely hoped the Northern public would never discover. He did not call the man a genius. He called him clear-headed, quick, and daring, and said he would fear him more than any other officer he had heard of on the Union side. That officer was Ulysses Grant, known at the time mostly as a failed businessman with a drinking reputation who had struggled to make a living outside the army. Ewell saw something in him years before most people on either side did. Longstreet defends Grant to Lee's own staff. The clearest example of a Confederate general standing up for Grant's reputation, directly and without hesitation, comes from James Longstreet, Lee's senior corps commander and the man Lee affectionately nicknamed his old war horse. When members of Lee's own staff dismissed Grant as an overrated commander who had simply been lucky, Longstreet did not let it stand. He told them plainly that he had known Grant for 3 years as a fellow cadet at West Point, that he had been present at Grant's wedding, that he had served alongside him in the Mexican War, and that he had personally observed his methods of command out west. He told them Confederates could not afford to underrate the man or the army he now led, and he made a prediction that turned out to be exactly right. He said Grant would fight them every single day and every single hour until the war itself was finished. This was not abstract professional respect. Longstreet and Grant had a personal history that ran far deeper than most wartime rivalries. Grant had married one of Longstreet's own cousins. The two men had spent years together in the peacetime army, playing cards to pass long, uneventful postings on the frontier. Longstreet later remembered that Grant reliably lost at their favorite card game, a detail so ordinary and human it is almost jarring next to everything else these two men would go on to do to each other's armies. Reassuring Lee before the surrender terms were even known. The personal knowledge of Grant mattered again at the worst possible moment for the Confederacy, during the tense hours before the surrender meeting at the McLean House. Lee was anxious about what Grant's terms might demand of his defeated army, and it was Longstreet who reassured him. He told Lee he knew Grant well enough to guarantee the terms would be exactly what Lee himself would have asked for had their positions been reversed. Longstreet was right. When the two men actually stepped into that parlor together, witnesses recorded that Grant's first words to his old friend were an invitation to play cards again, to remember the pleasant old days they had shared before any of this began. What Lee actually thought and what he may not have said. Robert E. Lee's own private assessment of Grant is where the story gets genuinely complicated and where a great deal of popular history needs a careful correction. A widely repeated quote has Lee declaring that he had searched military history, ancient and modern, and never found Grant superior, that he doubted Grant superior existed anywhere in recorded history. This line appears constantly in books and articles about Grant, and it sounds like exactly the kind of ringing endorsement people want to believe a defeated general gave his conqueror. There is a problem with it. No clean, reliable primary source has ever been produced for that quote, and Civil War historians who have gone looking for its origin have come away suspicious. A second quote, attributed to Lee in a letter to his son, has him saying Grant's talent seemed to lie mainly in acquiring superior numbers, a much less flattering assessment that credits Union resources rather than Union generalship. Both quotes cannot be fully genuine, since they contradict each other so directly, and that contradiction is itself a warning sign that at least one of them was invented or altered somewhere along the way. What is far better attested is a much simpler, less dramatic fact. When Lee was asked after the war which Union general he considered the most capable opponent he had faced, he did not say Grant at all. He said George McClellan without hesitation. That answer complicates any tidy story about Lee secretly revering the man who finally defeated him. Respect for a different reason than people assume. The version of Lee's private opinion that historians treat as most credible is not about genius at all. It is about a specific and uncomfortable recognition. Grant was the first Union commander willing to accept enormous casualties in a sustained war of attrition and simply keep coming, using the North's much larger manpower and resources without flinching from the cost, in a way none of his predecessors had been willing to do. Lee understood exactly what that meant for his own army's odds. He knew he was being trapped by a strategy that did not require brilliance so much as an unbreakable willingness to keep paying the price until the other side ran out of men first. That is a form of respect, but it is respect for resolve and resources, not admiration for a battlefield artist. The word belonged to newspapers, not to the men who fought him. This is the detail that should genuinely change how people think about this story. The word butcher, the label everyone assumes Confederate generals must have used more than anyone, did not originate with the men on the other side of Grant's rifles at all. It came from Northern newspapers. Reacting from a comfortable distance to the casualty figures pouring out of the Overland Campaign in 1864, the soldiers and generals actually facing Grant on the field, the men who had every personal reason to hate him, were often the ones showing him the most measured respect, not the least. Longstreet defended him outright. Ewell feared his talent years in advance. Lee, whatever his private mixed feelings, recognized Grant's resolve as the thing that was actually going to end the war, more than any single battlefield maneuver. A friendship that cost Longstreet everything. There is a final layer to this story that deserves to be told plainly, because it shows exactly what happened to a Confederate general who let his respect for Grant survive the war. Longstreet's closeness to Grant did not end at Appomattox. He supported Grant's presidency, worked for his administration, and remained his friend for the rest of Grant's life. For the former Confederacy, that loyalty made Longstreet a target. A rival general named Jubal early spent decades building a campaign to destroy Longstreet's wartime reputation, using his friendship with Grant as part of the case against him, and helping construct the lost cause narrative that would dominate Southern memory of the war for generations afterward. The Confederate general who had defended Grant's abilities before anyone else, who had personally guaranteed his fairness at the exact moment his own commander needed that guarantee most, was punished for it by his own side long after the guns went silent. What was actually said behind those doors? So what did Lee's generals actually say about Grant behind closed doors? Not the word everyone assumes, not simple contempt from men who watched him spend lives freely. What the record actually shows is an early warning from Ewell that turned out to be exactly right, a direct correction from Longstreet to his own commander's staff, a wartime friendship durable enough to survive years of trying to destroy each other's armies, and a grudging, complicated respect from Lee himself for the one quality Grant's own countrymen were quickest to hold against him: his refusal to stop. The Butcher was a name given by people watching from newspapers hundreds of miles from the fighting. The men who actually stood across the field from Grant, close enough to see exactly what he was willing to spend to win, mostly called him something closer to inevitable.